Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, another mascot platformer, an FMV game, and you ain't never had a friend like me. I'm your host, Jared, and today is November 3rd, 1993. One of the most popular animated films of the previous year finally gets not one game, but two. Released on the Sega Genesis in November 1993 was Disney's Aladdin. Aladdin is a side-scrolling action platformer. Play as Aladdin, loosely following the events of the movie. Only you wield a blade to attack and take out enemies and can throw apples for a temporary stun. Defeat some bosses, every now and then ride the magic carpet, and take down the evil Jafar. Disney's Aladdin was developed and published by Virgin Entertainment with help from Sega. They got the rights to make an Aladdin game after already having the rights to a game based on The Jungle Book, which they were actively developing. However, to make Aladdin, Disney wanted the game released alongside the home VHS release, meaning the team had less than a year to make it. Now, in the 90s, it used to take like a year for movies to be released on home video. The Aladdin movie came out in November 1992, and the home release, and thus the video games, got scheduled for November 1993. Sega also assured Disney that it would release in early November to help make sure that Aladdin would not go up against any new Sonic the Hedgehog games, which Sega had plenty lined up. We'll get to those in a couple of weeks. However, around the same time, there was another game. Released in November 1993 was Disney's Aladdin for the Super Nintendo. Aladdin for the Super Nintendo is a side-scrolling platformer. Play as Aladdin as you run and jump to get past enemies. Aladdin can jump on enemies' heads to defeat them, or use some acrobatic maneuvers like swinging on a beam or handspringing off of poles. You can also throw apples to stun them, and use a cloth for a slow fall. Enjoy some bonus stages of a magic carpet ride, and defeat the evil Jafar at the end. Disney's Aladdin for the SNES was developed and published by Capcom. It technically released later in November, but for simplicity, I'm talking about it now. The game's director was Shinji Mikami, the same guy who would go on to create Resident Evil. Now, in the 90s, a game with the same name on Nintendo could be completely different than what it was on Sega. These games were developed completely independently of each other, which is why they're so different. At the time, schoolyard debates raged on over which game was better, further fueling the Sega versus Nintendo console war. It was widely accepted that the Super Nintendo version was generally a good game, but everyone liked the Sega one more, for two reasons. One, it looked like the movie. Disney, for once, took an active role in the development of the Sega game, specifically with character design and animations, to help make sure it represented their property. And two, Aladdin has a sword in the Sega game. And that's cool. The Aladdin movie was a huge success for Disney, so a game based on it garnered attention. Nintendo Power even made it the cover of its December 1993 issue. Sega took it a step further and made television commercials for theirs.
At school I found this magic lamp, and I wished for Disney's Aladdin for my Sega Genesis. It's like the movie. I got to battle sword-slashing thieves, and nasty palace guards, and ride a flying carpet. And I still have two more wishes. Prove it!
Sega Genesis and Disney's Aladdin game cartridge, each sold separately.
Reviews for both games were very positive. The Sega game was getting 4.75 out of 5 from GamePro, 8.5 out of 10 from EGM, plus the Gold Award. The Super Nintendo game also did well, with Nintendo Power awarding it a 4 out of 5 and EGM giving it an 8.25 out of 10. The SNES game became Capcom's best-selling Super Nintendo game of all time that isn't named Street Fighter in any way. The Sega Genesis game became the third best-selling Sega Genesis game of all time, only being defeated by Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. If you're looking to play either game these days, you easily can. Both were included into the Disney Classic Games collection, currently available for Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and on Steam. Okay, I think this might be the last mascot, at least for this year. Released in November 1993, was Awesome Possum Kicks Dr. Machino's butt for the Sega Genesis. Awesome Possum is a side-scrolling platformer. Play as Awesome Possum, running, jumping, and defeating enemies while trying to get to the end of each stage. You can also find additional animal helper friends for brief extra abilities like a bee for flight or a rhino to ride on. Collect soda cans and empty bottles to clean up the environment, and after some levels, answer some trivia questions about wildlife and the planet. Defeat the evil Dr. Machino and save the Earth. Awesome Possum was developed and published by Tengen, which was a studio created by Atari. Its creation started in early 1992 when Tengen hired Richard Seaborn to make an environmentally conscious game. Now, in the 90s, people were just learning about something called global warming, which at the time was known as the greenhouse effect. This is also what led directly into the creation of other environmentally safe kids programming like Captain Planet and Widget, the World Watcher. The instruction manual for Awesome Possum includes a several-page comic further exploring its message. It's heavy-handed, explaining how Dr. Machino is demolishing a forest so that he can build a new parking lot. The gameplay is an uninspired clone of Sonic the Hedgehog, complete with ramps for speed and spinning off enemies when jumping on them. However, Awesome Possum did one main thing to make it stand out. He talked a lot, with real voice lines.
Wow, that was incredible! Check this out! Amazing! Take that, you techno freak! Oh boy!
It used a 16 megabit cartridge, and most of that went to compressed voice audio. Developer Tengen originally wanted him to be voiced by Robin Williams, who said no, so instead they got Doug Lawrence, who you may know best for his breakout role voicing Filbert in Rocko's Modern Life, or SpongeBob's Plankton for the slightly younger viewers. Awesome Possum came out at a crowded time. Not only was the holiday market getting filled with big-time video games, and there was also some new hardware, and of course, a gambit of other gaming mascots. The war was raging between Sonic and Mario, and Awesome Possum also had to go up against all the other ones. Rocky Rodent, Zool, Bonk, Hero the Acrobat, Sparkster. Bubsy, the only thing they had to make him stand out was the fact that he talked, which was used to heavily market the game. He was the only Sega Genesis character who, quote, really talks. Previews for the game, like the ones found in Electronic Gaming Monthly, even said that it's the voice lines that really makes the game, and worthy of a look. At release, however, there was a different tune. EGM reviewed it with an average of a 6 out of 10, liking the voices, but not the bland and choppy gameplay. GamePro magazine awarded it a perfect score in sound thanks to the digitized voice, but criticized it for lackluster gameplay and level design. These days, Awesome Possum is only really remembered for pretty much having a weird title. It was never released in Europe and has never been re-released or ported onto anything else. CD hardware was still all the rage, and what better to sell it than with some FMV. Released in November 1993, was Ground Zero Texas for the Sega CD. Ground Zero Texas is an FMV gallery shooter. Aliens are disguising themselves as people, and it's up to you to zap them all. All scenes play out with real actors on real sets compressed down onto the disc. It also has some familiar elements of Night Trap, where you must monitor 4 different locations to make sure you're keeping everyone safe. And also, everybody is a cowboy for some reason. Ground Zero Texas was developed by Digital Pictures, the same studio who basically only made FMV games. They also made Night Trap, Sewer Shark, and the Make My Video series of games, all for Sega CD. Even though Ground Zeroes has light gun style gameplay, it is not compatible with any light gun. You have to move the cursor around using the D-pad on the controller. Digital Pictures actually had something of a budget to develop Ground Zeroes with, thanks to the sales of Sewer Shark bundled with Sega CDs. They expanded sets, actors, and production value. Early previews were saying its visuals were breathtaking, despite the compression of the video. Actual reviews for it were more discerning than FMV games of years past. Electronic Gaming Monthly scored it with an average 7.5 out of 10, criticizing the lousy acting and corny dialogue. GamePro magazine rated it with a 3.8 out of 5, bemoaning that it doesn't have light gun support. It also has a really funny paragraph starting with, "Violence alert!" because you shoot people with a zappy gun. All reviewers did agree on one thing though. Ground Zeroes is the best Sega CD game they've seen yet. EGM would also say it's the best Sega CD game of 1993, beating out Sonic CD and Lunar Silver Star, and sales would reflect it. When it was released in early 1994 for the UK, it was a top-selling game for 4 months. And if for some reason you're saying to yourself, I kinda wanna play it, you can. It's available on Steam with restored video resolution, and it also got a new print run for PlayStation 4 from Limited Run Games. And playing Possum to avoid all the other games that aren't so awesome. Here's Editor Dylan.
The best version of Wayne's World released this week on the NES, also on Game Boy. But that's not saying much since they're all still awful. It's got Bart vs. Space Mutant vibes, which I actually enjoyed a ton before I developed, taste. But another game released on both platforms this week was WWF King of the Ring. Not as good as the last 3 or 4 WWF games I talked about, mostly because... Wait, did I see some shenanigans back there? Huh, that's peculiar. Well, let's take a look. Oh, wow, this is actually pretty consistent. Oh, but hang on, what do we have here? Yeah, I'ma call bullshit on this one. Here's the true price. Nice try though, Cupcake. And you thought you could pull a fast one on me. Speaking of pulling fast ones, Top Gear 2 released for SNES, and I can't wait to hear the soundtrack. Compared to the original, little disappointed, but I'm biased. Decades of nostalgia will do that to you. It's still got some great tracks though, both musically and for racing. Plus, the streamlined gameplay, graphical upgrade, and cool weather effects makes this another solid, if a bit safe, racer in the series. But if you want to mix up standard car racing on the Super Nintendo, then Lamborghini American Challenge shoots for something unique, in more ways than one. At first, the car controls like it's on ice, and the tracks aren't too memorable or interesting. But each race wins you money so you can upgrade your Lamborghini to drive like a normal car. Every location you choose has a distinct character with their own personality, and is somewhat reminiscent of F-Zero in that regard. They become your rival that you have to bet against before the race even begins. Bet how much you think you'll kick their ass and win big to soup up that sweet Lamborg. Another cool thing about this game is the fact that you can use the Super Scope to shoot your rivals off the track. And apparently, you can also steer with the SNES mouse. I can't even imagine how difficult that would be, but if anybody has the equipment to test that out, maybe handle the gun while you try to keep the Lamborghini steady with your feet. Now, does anybody remember our September 1st episode where I said a certain dinosaur game released on almost everything in August, with the exception of the SNES version, which comes out in November, I think. Well, we're back! A Dinosaur Story is a side-scrolling platformer based on the movie of the same name. I actually played this as a kid, but I still remember how the dinosaur would look at the camera, and it just looked off. But I remember getting 2 levels in before getting bored, which was 1 more level than present me got. Now, if only I had another dinosaur game to seamlessly transition. Jurassic Park finally released for the SNES, a couple months after all the other versions. Surely enough extra time to implement a simple save feature, or at the very least, a basic password system. Surely. Good thing too, because this game is hard. It's a top-down action game that doubles as a first-person shooter, and was also compatible with the SNES mouse. I thought it was compatible with the Super Scope as well, but I can't find anything to back that up. I am sick. And hopped up on cough medicine right now, so that could have been a fever dream. I see sounds and hear colors. 13 games released on these consoles this week in 1993. There are no saves or passwords for Jurassic Park, by the way. Wanted to make sure that was clear, just in case my, sarcasm modules were on the fritz again. But now that all the Jurassic Park games are out, which one is the definitive version? Well, in that same episode I mentioned earlier, let me know if there are any other games that are wildly different on other consoles, and I'll do my best to give them a mention as they release. Surprisingly, the majority of suggestions were the Game Gear version of Jurassic Park, which I basically skipped in that episode, which is embarrassing. And as it turns out, it is the best one. Action-packed side-scrolling run-and-gun sections, less engaging but still welcome driving sections to switch up the gameplay, well-done, extensive cutscenes by Game Gear standards, and just the sheer presentation is impressive for the handheld. Almost makes you want to buy a whole mountain of batteries just so you could play it for 15 minutes. guys. I just took an extra shot of NyQuil, and I still gotta edit the plethora of coughs and fuck-ups in this recording before I go to bed. So, good night, everybody.
Thank you, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, Aladdin on Genesis is super common. It's only $7 for a copy of the game, and $17 to get one with a box and manual. The SNES version is $15 loose and $50 complete. Awesome Possum is not so awesome. It released costing $69.95. Now it's only $15 and $25 for a complete copy. Ground Zero Texas is one of the most common Sega CD games. A lone disc is only $10 and it's $20 for one with the case and manual. And that's it for today. Next week, another 80s crossover dream come true, an SNES RPG sequel, and Blue 43, Brown 52, hut, 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 hut. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like Dwayne Ruff, Azriel Knight, and Taggy. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, especially if you played any of the games mentioned this week. And subscribe if you aren't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. I was one of those kids that argued up and down about which was better, the SNES Aladdin or the Sega Genesis Aladdin. I was a Nintendo kid and I kept renting Aladdin on SNES. I was all about the SNES version. I didn't care about how it looked, and my main argument was Aladdin never used a sword in the movie. Why was he have a sword in the Sega Genesis cartoon? I think it was one of the few times I actually lost an argument on the playground. All the other times about Nintendo though, I was right.